in the cold, silent, steel-gray waters east of the Arabian Sea. 18 fast attack skiffs carrying more than 180 armed pirates surged toward the USNS Franklin Ridge, a U.S. Navy contracted oil tanker carrying 2 million gallons of crude oil, enough fuel to power an entire carrier strike group for a week of combat operations. The pirates, led by Abdul Rahman Qadir Usfe, a former fisherman turned oil smuggling warlord, had been planning this moment for weeks. The first strike came at 3:24 a.m. when RPGs began to whine across the waves, followed by the steady hammering of K-103 rifles and the distinct thump of DSH K-12 7mm cannons. Their targets were not amateurs. The pirates were organized and determined, with an extensive smuggling network spanning Yemen, Somalia, Oman, Dubai, and 2 South American cartels and underworld empire that moved stolen oil, weapons, and cash across 3 continents. Tonight, they believed they could take the American tanker hostage. What followed would be a test of whether the Franklin Ridge could survive the attack or if America's military might would wipe them from the sea. At 3:22 a.m., the first alarms rang in the radar room of the Franklin Ridge. A contact appeared, then 3, then 9. Within a minute, 28 fast-moving echoes filled the radar screen, each traveling at over 35 knots. Thermal imaging confirmed the worst of pirates were closing in. Chief Officer Ramirez analyzed their approach. 3 prongs: perfect timing and spacing. These weren't fishermen. They were professionals, built for overwhelming force. The first shot came at 3:26 a.m., an RPG-7 hitting the starboard side with a deafening explosion that tore a 4-foot hole in the reinforced steel. The ship lurched violently, sparks flew, and alarms blared as the crew scrambled to prevent a full-scale disaster. Inside the pump room, gauges spiked, inching dangerously close to the temperature where crude oil could vaporize one more strike in the wrong compartment and the tanker would explode with the force of 25,000 pounds of TNT. The crew worked frantically to brace the pumps as another barrage of 12,000 rounds was unleashed by the pirates. DSH K-12 7mm rounds whipped through the night air, slashing across the hull while tracer fire cut the sky. Despite the assault, the crew fought back, with their Mk38 cannon sending explosive rounds into the nearest skiff, sinking one. But it wasn't enough. The pirates pressed in, 7 boats pushing through the outer defense line, closing to under 200 yards, the deadly killing zone, where RPGs would be most effective. As the battle raged, flames began to tear through the ship's starboard wiring run. Temperatures soared to 152 degrees Fahrenheit, only 8 degrees shy of vaporizing the crude oil. If that happened, even a single spark would turn the Franklin Ridge into a floating inferno. The pirates, growing bolder as the crew fought to stave off disaster, had a new wave coming in, a second force of 30 skiffs carrying 70 additional fighters. The total number of attackers now stood at 250, a force that mirrored a small militia rather than a typical pirate gang. By 3:46 a.m., the pirates, now closing in from all sides, began their second wave of attacks. RPGs and automatic fire tore through the Franklin Ridge, with a rocket smashing into the aft crane, sending a violent explosion across the deck. Chief Officer Ramirez steadied himself. "We don't hold them here," he muttered. "We lose everything." At that moment, the tanker was locked in a deadly struggle at point-blank range with the pirates, grappling hooks flying through the air and automatic fire tearing into the crew. The sailors fought back as best they could, but the ship was being overwhelmed. Then, at 3:58 a.m., a thunderous sound broke the chaos, the unmistakable roar of U.S. Navy aircraft. 2 MH-60R Seahawk helicopters cut through the dark, barely 120 feet above the waves. The pirates, hearing the approaching choppers, began to scatter in panic, but it was already too late. At 3:59 a.m., the first Seahawk launched 2 Hellfire missiles, which streaked across the night, slamming into a cluster of pirate skiffs packed too tightly together to escape. The resulting explosion tore 6 boats apart, sending debris and bodies flying into the air in a grotesque spray of fire and metal. On the Franklin Ridge, the crew shielded themselves from the shockwave, knowing their salvation had arrived. The second Seahawk, arriving from the west, unleashed a barrage of 20mm cannon fire that shredded more pirate boats in its path. 3 skiffs were destroyed almost instantly, their fuel tanks erupting into bright orange flames. However, the pirates weren't done yet. Desperation spurred one final attack, an RPG launched from less than 90 yards, crashing into the tanker's aft crane. The explosion threw 2 sailors off their feet, burning one and sending another hurtling across the deck. But the Franklin Ridge remained intact. Despite the damage, the pirates were on the retreat, their chances slipping away with every passing second. By 4:05 a.m., the Franklin Ridge's crew, reinforced by the relentless aerial strikes and the precision data provided by the MQ-9 Reaper drone overhead, began to press their advantage. The Mk-38 cannon roared again, sending 25mm rounds into the last of the pirate boats. One skiff was completely torn apart, while 2 others sank almost immediately. With their forces now broken, the pirates scattered into the darkness, leaving only the wreckage and oil slicks behind. The crew had held their ground, and the Franklin Ridge's crude oil, still safely contained, survived to see another dawn. As the chaos finally settled and the sea calmed, the pirates were gone. The counterstrike had worked, but only just. The Franklin Ridge had come close to disaster, but America's military might had once again proven decisive. The pirates, once certain they could seize a fortune in oil, now faced the cold reality of their failure. And on the horizon, the USS Harley prepared for the next call to action. The night had been won, but the war, as always, was far from over. The final strike came at 4:09 a.m., when both helicopters coordinated a simultaneous run, launching 4 Hellfire missiles into the densest cluster of enemy boats. The explosion was so intense, it lit the entire sea like daylight for 3 full seconds. As the smoke cleared, the aftermath was devastating. More than 80 pirates were obliterated in an instant, and the remaining attackers scattered in disarray. With no formation, no courage, and no chance left, the Franklin Ridge was no longer prey. It stood under the full protection of the United States Navy. By 4:32 a.m., the gunfire, engines, and screams had all faded into silence. The crew of the Franklin Ridge knew the battle was over, not because the danger had passed, but because there was nothing left to attack them. The sea around the tanker had become a graveyard. Burning fuel spread across the surface in long, broken ribbons, and 12 skiffs floated upside down, while 4 others sank into the black waters. Debris, weapons, and bodies drifted with the current, painting a gruesome picture of what had transpired. The final toll was staggering. Of the 180 pirates who had launched the assault, 112 were dead, 41 were captured, and the rest had fled toward the Somali corridor, scattered and broken. In less than 40 minutes, a force large enough to overwhelm a coastal garrison had been reduced to fragments, but the shock didn't end with the battle's conclusion. During the post-battle sweep, Navy teams recovered waterproof containers floating among the wreckage. Inside, they found documents, encrypted phones, fuel invoices, and GPS logs. Within an hour, analysts aboard the USS Harley had pieced together the truth. This was no rogue pirate gang. It was a state-supported smuggling network funneling money, weapons, and fuel from Ukala, Yemen, through the Gulf of Aden. The raid had been financed with $2.4 million in cash and 50,000 gallons of off-the-record diesel. Worse yet, one seized radio contained coordinates for a refueling vessel waiting 18 nautical miles south, stocked with ammunition, replacement fighters, and satellite equipment. If the U.S. strike had been delayed by just 10 minutes, a third wave could have arrived, potentially turning the entire Gulf into a battleground by dawn. On the Franklin Ridge, the damage assessment was miraculous. 4 hull breaches, 1 destroyed crane, 9 injured sailors, 2 critically, but the oil tanks remained intact, and all 2 million gallons of crude had survived without a single ignition. Engineers worked carefully through the charred metal, sealing ruptured pipes and compartments. As the sun began to rise over the eastern horizon, the tanker, battered and blackened, emerged from the sea grew quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that comes after the fire has passed. For the crew, it was a sobering reminder that they hadn't just survived an attack, they had watched an entire criminal empire shatter before them, revealing a war much larger than piracy, far deeper than the sea itself, and this battle was only the beginning. By 5:12 a.m., the sun had yet to break the horizon, but the light from burning fuel danced across the waves, revealing a surreal battlefield. The Franklin Ridge floated at the center of its card and blackened, but alive. Around it, the shattered remains of what had been the largest pirate assault in modern U.S. naval history drifted in the current. Navy teams from the USS Harley quickly moved through the wreckage, boarding overturned skiffs and scanning half-submerged hulls for clues. Every boat told a story, and each piece of equipment uncovered brought them closer to the truth. The first big break came when they found a waterproof crate lodged between two sinking boats. Inside were 12 iridium tracking modules, military-grade technology used for covert shipments, not tools of pirates. Minutes later, divers recovered 19 Thoria satellite phones, all encrypted, still warm from recent transmissions. Most belonged to known smugglers or militia members operating out of Yemen's southern coast, but some were flagged by the D4 narcotics trafficking through East Africa. However, the most revealing discovery came from a battered duffel bag pulled from beneath a torn skiff. Inside was a military-grade laptop wrapped in plastic and sealed with epoxy. When analysts opened it, they uncovered a map with detailed routes, timings, fuel drops, and payment logs. The map traced a logistical network worth over $180 million, extending from Ukala to Bosaso and beyond to 3 unnamed ports farther west. Each arrow on the map represented a smuggling rung, and every timestamp corresponded to a shipment that had been lost or intercepted over the past 7 months. This wasn't a pirate gang. It was a well-oiled supply chain, moving oil, fuel, weapons, and even people. The pirates had merely been the final link in the chain. By 5:47 a.m., the command team had uncovered a simple, yet devastating truth. The raid on the Franklin Ridge wasn't a robbery. It was an attempt to capture an American oil payload to fuel a war economy building on the other side of the Arabian Peninsula. The real enemy had never touched the water. They watched from afar, connected through satellites, funded by cartels, and shielded by nations willing to hide their fingerprints. And for the first time, the U.S. Navy knew exactly where to look next. At 6:18 a.m., the sky began to pale, but the moment felt nothing like morning. The wreckage still burned, the air thick with the stench of diesel and charred metal. Inside the operations room aboard the USS Holly, the truth began to take shape, far larger and more complex than anyone had anticipated. Data analysts worked like surgeons, quiet, precise, and focused. Every device recovered from the battlefield was logged, scanned, and decrypted. By 6:21 a.m., the digital puzzle started to form. The first shock came from a cluster of 7 satellite phones, all of which had connected to a relay node in Hadramat, Yemen, just 48 hours before. The region wasn't controlled by pirates, it was controlled by a coalition of militias funded through illegal fuel operations. The timestamps matched the precise window when the pirate flotilla had left Somalia, confirming the pirates were just one piece of a much larger operation. The second shock was even more unsettling. Financial logs from the salvaged laptop revealed that 27 illegal oil shipments had been carried out over the past 7 months. Each shipment had rerouted between $3 million and $9 million worth of crude oil, generating over $180 million in revenue. Enough to fund a small army, but the money didn't travel alone. It had passed through shell companies in Dubai and Djibouti, laundered through 11 million United States dollars. Fuel contracts had been exchanged for weapons, and communication relays tied to 3 intelligence brokers operating across the Horn of Africa revealed an operation that was anything but local. Nothing about this was disorganized. It was a massive, multi-continent smuggling network. By 6:32 a.m., the network's hierarchy became clear. There were 3 tiers. The first tier consisted of the pirates' cheap, disposable, desperate, the visible tip of the spear. The second tier was made up of the fuel traffickers in Yemen and Somalia, wealthy, armed, and protected, the engine that powered the operation. The third tier, the most concealed, were the financiers, the unseen architects of the operation. These individuals had diplomatic passports, offshore accounts, private security forces, and had never fired a gun, but they had orchestrated violence across oceans. A lieutenant leaned back from the display screen, whispering, they weren't trying to steal the tanker. They were trying to replace a shipment they already sold. A silence fell, the kind that follows a revelation. The pirates, it seemed, had never been the real danger. They were merely a doorway leading to a sprawling crime syndicate stretching across 3 continents, fueled by stolen oil and protected by powerful shadows. And now, the U.S. Navy had stepped inside that doorway. By 6:10 a.m., the horizon had turned silver, but no one aboard the Holly looked toward the sunrise. Every eye was locked onto the tactical screens, each one showing the unmistakable signal of a new development. The pirates who had survived the initial onslaught weren't alone. The first UAV feed from an MQ-9 Reaper, circling at 27,000 feet, showed a zigzag trail of heat signatures cutting across the water. These weren't survivors or debris. They were 14 fast boats, still intact, pushing south at full throttle. Then came a second feed from a P-8 Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft, sweeping its radar across the region. It picked up something larger, darker, an unmistakably deliberator, 110 FT command vessel disguised as a fishing trawler, moving 22 nautical miles away. Unlike the skiffs, this vessel wasn't trying to escape. It was repositioning. The operations chief spoke the truth aloud. They're regrouping. This isn't a retreat. The mood in the command room shifted instantly. This was no longer defense. It was pursuit. At 6:18 a.m., the U.S. Fifth Fleet authorized Operation Title Cut, a targeted interdiction aimed not at pirates, but at the very backbone of the smuggling empire, exposed in the wake of the attack. Orders moved quickly to deploy one Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, launch to MH-60R Seahawks for immediate intercept, and prepare a rapid assault team aboard Harley. UAV surveillance was to cover a 65 nautical mile radius. The message from command was cold, short, and absolute. We finished this today. Below deck, the assault team suited up 30 men and women, each trained for close quarters maritime combat. Rifle checks clicked like clockwork, grenade harnesses tightened, and boots echoed against steel flooring as they moved toward the launch bay. Above them, the Seahawks rose into the air, their blades cutting through the morning haze, and the ocean rumbled in response, the engines building toward the hunt. Meanwhile, analysts traced the surviving skiffs back to their point of origin. The coordinates led to a dock outside Condola, a known smuggling hub connected to 4 militias and a cartel operative flagged by both Interpol and the CIA. The crew of the Franklin Ridge, some still bandaged, others still bleeding, watched as the helicopters rose into the sky. They had survived, but they weren't finished. Their battle had only revealed the tip of an iceberg, global criminal syndicate that spanned continents, and it was still out there waiting. The hunt had only just begun. The U.S. Navy knew exactly what it was preparing to do. The battle at sea had ended, but the pursuit on open water had just begun. The United States was no longer on the defensive. It was coming for the heart of the criminal network. By 6:42 a.m., the mist rolled low across the water, a thick, colorless curtain that swallowed both sound and distance. The pirates believed it would hide them. They were wrong. The command vessel, 110 feet long, pushed through the fog like a dark spine on the ocean, its deck crowded with fighters who had survived the slaughter at the Franklin Ridge. Many were wounded, all were armed. Above them, the Reaper drone watched every move. When the USS Holly closed to within 1 nautical miles, the order came through that comes with surgical calm: execute Title Cut. The strike began immediately. 2 MH-60R Seahawks descended almost vertically through the haze, their rotors thundering like the crash of storm surf. The first burst of 20mm cannon fire ripped across the ocean surface, punching holes through 3 escort skiffs before the pirates had even raised their weapons. One skiff vanished in a white flash as its fuel tank exploded, sending debris arcing across the waves. The command vessel fought back, opening fire with 6 DS HK-12 7mm machine guns, tracers lighting up the mist like red spears. Bullets ripped through the air, striking one of the Seahawks, sparks dancing off its armor plates. The helicopter banked hard left, returning fire with short, controlled bursts that tore into the gun positions along the starboard rail. By 6:44 a.m., the real assault arrived. A rigid-hull inflatable boat, RHIB, launched from Holly at full throttle, carrying 12 Navy special operators. The boat surged through 6-foot waves, closing the final 300 yards under a storm of gunfire. 2 RPGs streaked past, one missing by less than a yard, the other detonating in a column of spray taller than a house. The rib didn't slow. At 50 yards, the operators fired M320 grenades into the aft deck. 2 detonated against the bulkhead, another hit a weapons crate, triggering secondary explosions that engulfed the rear half of the vessel in a hellish orange fire. Screams echoed, metal peeled away, and the pirates scattered. The boarding was swift and brutal. Within 8 seconds, operators stormed again. Close quarters gunfire shook the hull, and the bridge fell in under 2 minutes. Inside the captain's cabin, they found what they came for: a hardened case containing 3 encrypted hard drives, a ledger listing 43 smuggling routes, and a master operations schedule extending 6 months forward. Every page was evidence, every name a target. At 6:53 a.m., the command vessel began sinking. Its stern dipped beneath the waves as flames crawled across the shattered deck. The special operators withdrew to the RHIB. Minutes later, the ship rolled onto its side and vanished beneath the water. Another piece of the network was gone. However, the secrets were only just beginning to surface. By 7:28 a.m., the wreck of the command vessel still bubbled beneath the water's surface. When the first decrypted files came online aboard the USS Holly, operators gathered around the screen, expecting a list of names or coordinates, but what they found was far bigger. The hard drives contained 6 months of operational planning, mapping out a criminal pipeline stretching far beyond Somalia. It tied together for foreign militias, 2 offshore oil syndicates, 3 South American cartels, and a network of financiers hiding behind diplomatic passports. Every route, every shipment, every payment was written in plain numbers. The total value of the operation exceeded $620 million. This wasn't a pirate ring, it was an economy. By 7:42 a.m., the U.S. Fifth Fleet convened an emergency briefing. Satellite images confirmed the network's vast reach, stretching from Ukalla to Kandala, from Oman to the Maldives, from cartel-controlled zones in Colombia to refineries in East Africa. Dozens of flagged vessels had moved through these channels unnoticed. One document hit harder than the rest, a shipment log titled FR Delta Replacement Run, which listed the exact time of the pirate assault on the Franklin Ridge. The meaning was unmistakable. The 180 attackers weren't after stolen oil. They were fulfilling a contract for someone who had already sold it. The tanker was never the end. Golet was simply a missing piece in a much larger operation. As the Franklin Ridge limped toward safety under escort, its deck still scarred and smoking, sailors stared at the quiet horizon. The ocean seemed calm again, but everyone understood the truth. The pirates had been defeated, but the network behind them was still alive, spread across continents, hidden behind governments, protected by money and distance. The battle on the water was over, but the war behind it had only just begun.